I'm Amber Jackson, 35, a journalist. The air was thick with the dust of the Middle East, clinging to my clothes, and the exhaustion in my bones. All I wanted was my driveway, my quiet, and the sight of my dream car, a gleaming 1969 Corvette Stingray waiting for me. I rounded the corner, key in hand, ready to feel its familiar soul. But the space was empty. The concrete was bare. The car, my prized possession, was gone. My heart didn't just drop, it was torn out. I stumbled inside, my shock dissolving into a cold panic. I managed to ask my mother, "Helen, where is my car?" I was desperate for a logical explanation. A tow truck, a mistake. She didn't look worried. She simply offered a cold, satisfied smirk. Then she delivered the blow, her voice dripping with casual cruelty. "Thanks to your car, Emily's having the time of her life. What would you do when the people you love become the enemies who destroy what you built?" To understand why a car, Corvette Stingray, meant so much, you have to go back to when I was 7. My Grandpa Joe was the only one in the family who truly saw me. He'd take me to classic car shows, teaching me that those machines weren't just metal, they had a soul, a history, and a quiet strength. It felt like our secret language. Meanwhile, my parents, John and Helen, dismissed our shared passion as silly. They'd look at me, covered in grease from helping Joe, with barely concealed disdain. Their focus was solely on Emily, the golden child, praising her every graceful pivot in ballet class. That was the first lesson I learned. My worth was secondary to her perfection. They dismissed Grandpa Joe's wisdom, choosing instead to laud Emily for her talent. This contrast established the foundation of our family dynamic, one of quiet interest versus celebrated conformity. After that, I became the independent daughter, the quiet one in the shadow of my sister's spotlight. My role was simple: don't cause trouble, and don't cost money. Emily was the darling, feminine, and the one they constantly called perfect. She was effortlessly adored. I, however, was treated like the reliable, slightly uninteresting backup plan. My parents compared us endlessly, my quiet determination fading against her effortless charm. I was the responsible one, the one who was forgotten, yet felt constantly pressured to achieve more just to earn a nod of recognition. I spent my entire adolescence trying to prove I was worthy of the same emotional investment they poured into her. I never asked for much. A simple "we're proud of you" would have been enough. But every time I succeeded, straight A's, scholarships, early career wins, their reaction was always the same: a polite, passing glance, followed by an immediate pivot back to Emily's latest minor milestone. I existed to be the dependable, unloved shadow. This pattern cemented a painful truth: my purpose in the family was to be the stable foundation they took for granted, while Emily was the celebrated, extravagant ornament. When I was 16, I decided to turn my Grandpa Joe's lessons into a real skill. I wanted to study auto repair at a local vocational college. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a deep, quiet passion, a way to feel close to him. I presented my application to my parents, my heart full of early hope. But my enthusiasm was flatly denied. My dream was quickly deemed unaffordable and unsuitable for a nice girl. They claimed we had to be financially careful. Yet, in the very same month, Emily got to start private ballet lessons at a premier, expensive studio across the city. Her hobby, her dream, was instantly considered essential and non-negotiable. Their reasoning wasn't about money, it was about status and preference. That was the first clear sign their priorities were cemented, and I was not one of them. The injustice sharpened with every year. While Emily glided through life in new designer outfits, always the picture of effortless perfection, I was wearing faded hand-me-downs. My parents never offered me a budget for clothes, saying I should be practical. But practicality was never a word they applied to Emily. The rulebook was different for the golden child. The most painful contrast came at graduation. Emily received a stunning new car, a gift wrapped in lavish celebration. I stood on the sidelines, watching her excitement, feeling the familiar sting of invisibility. My graduation gift? I was told I had to pay my own tuition. My father handed me the university bill, saying, "You're the strong, sensible one, Amber. You'll figure it out." It was a compliment weaponized into a financial burden. His words sounded like encouragement, but they were simply a statement of fact. Their support came with conditions I never met, and their resources were strictly reserved for the celebrated daughter. I learned early I was self-sufficient because I had no other choice. Since I had no financial safety net, I had to create my own. I wasn't just working hard, I was working twice as hard. My college years were a blur of caffeine and minimum wage. I juggled 3 jobs: a barista, a tutor, and a night cleaner, all while finishing college with honors. My grit became my currency. My only motivation was proving myself to me. My parents offered no help, but that neglect unintentionally became the fuel for my determination. Every late night, every worn-out sneaker was a brick laid in the foundation of my independence. I was finally proving myself through grit rather than their favoritism. I believed that once I achieved real, measurable success, they would finally see me as an adult they could respect, not just a problem they could ignore. I was building a life they couldn't control, fueled by the hope that one day, my sacrifice would be recognized. I didn't just survive college, I excelled. I earned my way into a prestigious newsroom in the city, the kind of job that was supposed to impress. The moment I got the call, I felt a rush of triumph. I called my parents immediately, expecting, at minimum, a congratulations. Instead, my father said, "That's nice, dear, but is the salary good enough? Emily just got asked to audition for a local commercial." They barely noticed my professional milestone, choosing instead to focus entirely on Emily's minor, fleeting opportunity. It was a clear message: my sacrifice was worthless, her potential was paramount. Even as I published my first front-page story, they continued to spotlight Emily's trivial milestones: her new boyfriend, her slight weight loss, her successful party planning. I was the one bringing home real news, but she was the one starring in their personal soap opera. This persistent, painful pattern drove home the ultimate truth: my achievements were only ever seen as steps toward their own perceived stability, while Emily's life was the celebrated centerpiece. It was the worst kind of unfairness, deepening the sense of bitterness that I had fought so hard to outrun. The resentment slowly began to fade when I realized I didn't need their applause. My real breakthrough came after my first front-page feature went live. My colleagues were genuinely excited. They didn't see the tired girl from the toxic family, they saw the dedicated journalist. They celebrated my win like it was their own. That night, I met Olivia. She wasn't just a colleague, she was a sharp lawyer who had shifted careers. She told me, "Your work speaks for itself, Amber. Never let anyone shrink that." She validated my struggle and my success without needing to compare it to anything else. It was a powerful reminder that recognition could come from a chosen family. The kind of love that isn't conditional, the kind that celebrates your genuine success, not your superficial compliance. This acceptance was the lifeline I desperately needed. For the first time, I felt the quiet warmth of being truly seen and valued for my actual accomplishments. I finally understood that I didn't need to beg for their approval. I had earned my own. This newfound hope allowed me to turn my focus away from their cold judgment and toward building my own future. I had finally found my light. With my newfound professional success and my chosen family cheering me on, I shifted my focus entirely. My goal was simple, yet enormous: the Corvette Stingray. I saved every penny. I lived frugally, said no to unnecessary trips, and tracked my expenses like a hawk. Every sacrifice was a promise to the little girl who loved cars with Grandpa Joe. I practiced an unwavering discipline, fueled by the knowledge that this car would be a monument to my own self-worth. Then, the day arrived. It was right there, the 1969 Stingray. Glistening. $85,000 of sweat, sacrifice, and pure, unadulterated resolve. I signed the papers, and it was officially mine. I took it out on the open road and felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. This car wasn't a frivolous purchase, it was the physical embodiment of my independence. It represented the life I built for myself, entirely separate from my family's money or approval. It was my trust in my own hard work. For the first time, a major possession in my life was truly mine, untainted by expectation or debt. I felt complete. I had just wrapped up another exhausting assignment overseas. The entire flight home, I pictured one thing: the sun hitting the chrome of my Stingray. I was full of anticipation. Finally, my driveway. I expected that surge of joy. Instead, a cold wave of tension washed over me. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The garage door was open slightly, revealing only the familiar concrete slab. I rushed to the garage. My eyes scanned the space, hoping for some miraculous explanation, but the space was utterly, tragically empty. The quiet of the house amplified the deafening roar of panic in my ears. That's when my mother, Helen, emerged from the kitchen, holding a sealed envelope. Her expression, as I already mentioned, wasn't concern, it was a twisted sense of satisfaction. She handed me the papers without a word of explanation or comfort. I tore the envelope open. Inside were copies of the deed, a bill of sale, and transfer papers all signed. My parents had sold the car. The final, brutal revelation: I hadn't been robbed by strangers. I had been plundered by family. The emotional blow was instant and crushing. This was the one thing I had built, earned, and claimed entirely for myself. The papers confirmed the theft, but the true crime was the violation of trust. That car was the symbol of my independence, the one thing they couldn't control. And they destroyed it the moment I left. My homecoming became a declaration of war. I walked back into the living room, the bill of sale in my hand, feeling like a weapon. My father, John, was there now. "You sold my car." It wasn't a question, it was a cold, hard accusation. John didn't deny it. He cleared his throat. "It's a temporary measure, Amber. Think of it as a loan." A loan, without my knowledge. My mind instantly flashed to the $85,000 price tag. Helen quickly jumped in. Emily needed capital for her luxury trip to the Greek Isles. This was the only way to facilitate her happiness. My car, my years of sacrifice, reduced to capital for Emily's lavish vacation. I forced the words out. It was my car. I earned it. It's in my name. My ownership, the legal proof, the hard-won independence. It meant absolutely nothing to them. John scoffed. "We're your parents, Amber. What's mine is ours, and what's yours is also ours. We assumed you wouldn't be petty over a mere vehicle." The casual arrogance replaced any last shred of disbelief. I realized the profound depth of the humiliation. They didn't just steal a car, they stole the physical representation of my separation from them, then rubbed it in my face that my autonomy was invalid. The pain of the theft was nothing compared to the pain of the emotional rejection. The illusion of my financial independence instantly collapsed, proving that in their eyes, I was still just a resource to be exploited. Who was the real thief? The one who took my money, or the one who took my dignity? My entire life was a lie based on their conditional acceptance. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The storm of emotion cleared, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I looked at the empty space in the driveway, and I saw a blank slate. I was done. For years, they had seen me as a dependable resource, a financial safety net they could exploit whenever Emily's life hit a bump. That role ended tonight. I told myself, if they see me as a bank, I'll be the banker who says no. I would become the person who controls the funds, and I was denying their withdrawal. I spent the next 24 hours researching the legal grounds for fraud, theft, and conversion. I realized that my $85,000 car sale was not an ethical disagreement. It was a criminal act. A new resolve sparked inside me. My mission was no longer to win their love, but to reclaim my autonomy. I would treat this like any other hostile corporate takeover with precision and cold efficiency. I moved through the house with a granite silence. My parents, sensing the shift, tried to appeal to my guilt. "Amber, you're being overdramatic. We're family," they insisted. But the old guilt triggers didn't work anymore. I had erected a wall of pure, professional detachment. This was my true independence, the ability to choose myself over their manufactured drama. I reached out to Olivia. My decision wasn't just about the car. It was about protecting every future achievement from their toxic entitlement. I was no longer the little girl begging for a nod of approval. I was the journalist who pursued the truth, the professional who demanded respect, and the daughter who finally understood that setting boundaries was the ultimate act of strength. Olivia was immediately on board. She saw the legal angles, but more importantly, she saw the sheer injustice. She confirmed that this was outright theft, made more egregious because of the family relationship. We mapped out a plan that was tactical, not emotional. The goal wasn't just to get the money back, it was to use the full weight of the law to permanently establish my boundaries and end their sense of entitlement. I had to wait. Wait for Emily to return from her Greek Isles vacation, funded by my sacrifice. The irony tasted like ash. I needed her physically present to fully feel the consequence of her parents' actions. This wasn't revenge born of childish spite. This was an adult decision to establish parity. They had tried to keep me in the child role, dependent and disposable. Now, I was stepping into the role of the enforcer. The final, calculated move was being prepared. The war was coming, and for the first time in my life, I held all the power. The waiting game was finally over. Emily was back from the Greek Isles, sun-kissed and oblivious. The stage was set, a tense family dinner. I brought the truth to the table, along with the pasta. Emily launched into a boring monologue about her trip to the resorts, the expensive jewelry she bought. Her entire self-indulgent speech was funded by my blood, sweat, and tears. I waited until the food was cold and the wine was poured. Then, I placed a copy of the bill of sale on the table, silencing her mid-sentence. "Let's talk about the Corvette," I said, my voice dangerously level. John turned pale, gripping the edge of the table. He wasn't afraid of the law, he was afraid of the embarrassment. Helen, ever the defensive one, tried to intervene. "Amber, not at the table. We said it was a loan. We'll give you the money back eventually. This is blackmail, Amber. It's ridiculous. We'll simply pay you back. We're good for it." I didn't engage with Helen's theatrics. I looked directly at my father. "You don't get it, Dad. It's not about the money. It's about the $85,000 worth of trust and respect you destroyed. And no amount of money can fix that." I turned to Emily. "You enjoyed your time in Greece. With my $85,000 car. Your parents liquidated my life's sacrifice to fund your souvenir shopping." Helen started crying the dramatic, manipulative tears she always used to halt any criticism. "I can't believe my own daughter would put her mother through this. Have you no heart?" I met her gaze evenly. "My heart was broken the day you told me my dream was unaffordable while funding Emily's ballet for 10 years. Save the drama for your defendants, Helen." I slid another paper across the table, a formal, legal document. "This isn't a family discussion. This is a lawsuit. I'm not waiting for eventually. I'm suing you, John and Helen, for theft by conversion and fraud." My father shouted, "You can't sue your own family. Think of the PR. Think of Emily's future." He was still prioritizing their image and Emily. He never prioritized me. My eyes were steady. "You proved family means nothing to you when you sold my life for a vacation. I'm doing this to set a permanent boundary. You cannot use me as your financial discard bin anymore." Emily finally spoke, her voice laced with self-pity. "It was just a car. You have money. I needed this trip to find myself." Her privileged excuse was the final match to the powder keg. "You needed to find yourself? Great. Now you get to find your own way out of this fraud case." I paused at the front door. "Expect a call from my lawyer, Olivia, tomorrow morning. She'll outline the terms for dropping the criminal charges. Until then, you are no longer my parents. You are my defendants. I am no longer financially or emotionally responsible for any of you." I walked out, leaving them in the stunned chaos of their own making. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound of triumph I had ever heard. I walked away from that house, and for the first time I wasn't just walking away from them, I was walking toward myself. The air felt lighter. I could finally breathe. The first call I made was to Olivia. She was calm, professional, and entirely supportive. "You did the right thing, Amber. You chose your self-worth over their manufactured drama." Her support was the antithesis of my family's. They measured my value in dollars and compliance. Olivia measured it in courage and integrity. This was true family. The next morning, I woke up without the familiar pit of dread. The silence of my own apartment was glorious. It was the silence of a woman who had finally put her own life first. My focus at work sharpened. I was no longer fighting for scraps of approval. I was fighting for the truth in my journalism. My professional life, which they had dismissed, was my anchor. They called and texted, frantic and angry. Their messages were all about money and image. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the real betrayal, and I felt absolutely zero regret. This wasn't about vengeance anymore, it was about renewal. Olivia laid out the terms: full repayment of the $85,000, plus legal fees, or the criminal charges would proceed. The power had completely shifted. I had finally used my voice and they were forced to listen. They settled almost immediately. The threat of criminal charges and public humiliation was too great. The wire transfer hit my account, $85,000. It wasn't a gift, it was restitution for theft. The real victory wasn't the money. It was the knowledge that I had forced them to acknowledge my sovereignty. I had drawn a line they could never cross again. I was no longer their dependent. I was the architect of my own life, and the sweet taste of affirmation was more valuable than any Corvette. A few weeks later, the transaction was complete. The money was back, and I went shopping. I bought a brand new, reliable SUV. It wasn't the Stingray, but it was pragmatic, and more importantly, it was untouchable. Driving that new SUV felt like a shield. I was financially whole, legally vindicated, and completely free. But freedom had a cold, unexpected side effect: emptiness. I had won the war, but I had lost the family. The family I had spent a lifetime trying to earn approval from. Even though the relationship was toxic, the void it left behind was real and painful. I found an old photo of Emily and me as children before the favoritism and the greed took root. For a fleeting moment, I missed the simplicity of having a sister. I missed having parents, even flawed ones. But that was the past. The present was me, alone, legally solvent, and emotionally scarred. I had replaced a toxic dependence with absolute independence, and the transition wasn't smooth. My family, realizing the permanence of my action, attempted one last plea, begging me to just forgive and forget. I didn't respond. The tears and manipulation of the past held no power over the new self I had fought so hard to create. I talked to Olivia about the hollow feeling. She reminded me that my victory was the most profound act of self-love possible. "You didn't just win a lawsuit, Amber, you won your soul back." That truth was the healing I needed. I realized the ultimate victory was not defined by their pain, but by my resilience. The truest revenge wasn't the lawsuit, it was the fact that my life, built on honesty and effort, would continue to grow, while their lives, built on entitlement and lies, would likely stagnate in their own small, self-inflicted prison. My success, mixed with that bittersweet loneliness, was simply the price of my sovereignty. I finally understood that the greatest revenge is not lowering yourself to your enemy's level, but rising above them to a place where they can no longer reach you. The $85,000 was back, but they weren't done. True to form, my family decided that instead of accepting responsibility, they'd weaponize their victimhood on social media. Emily, of course, led the charge. She posted tearful selfies claiming I was financially abusive and had abandoned my family in their time of fear. The comments section exploded with sympathy for the poor little sister. John and Helen joined in, painting a picture of the cruel, ambitious daughter who only cared about money. They leveraged their public image as a wholesome, traditional family. They were desperate to save face, sacrificing my reputation in the process. I saw my opportunity. Olivia warned me against engaging. "Amber, you won. Don't lower yourself." But I wasn't lowering myself. I was utilizing the only tool they respected, public image and absolute truth. I typed out my post. It wasn't emotional. It was a journalistic report. I attached the police reports, filed by Olivia, the bank statement showing the loan repayment, and most damningly, screenshots of years of manipulative texts. The screenshots were the cruel truth. Messages like, "Don't you dare ruin Emily's audition by mentioning your little newspaper job, and we need that money for Emily's wellness retreat. Amber, it's not a loan, it's family support." The public reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Their facade but perfect family shattered. People turned on Emily immediately, seeing her tears for the self-pity they truly were. The public outcry was deafening. The cruelest irony was that the $85,000 I'd fought for was now a footnote. The actual cost to them was the public knowledge of their hypocrisy. Helen, whose entire self-worth was tied to her social standing, had her charity board invite rescinded. Her manipulation finally cost her the one thing she valued more than her children's status. John, the smug, corporate father, faced an internal review. The public disclosure of him signing a fraudulent bill of sale, a criminal act, was a serious threat to his executive career. Emily, used to being the adored centerpiece, was suddenly the subject of massive public scrutiny and scorn. The attention she craved finally arrived, but it was the bitter kind, the kind that exposed her entitlement for the world to see. Her friends, who once admired her lifestyle, likely saw the ugly foundation of her privilege. I received one final message from her, not an apology, but a bitter, resentful attack. That message, full of spite, was swiftly deleted. I didn't need to read it. I had read the script of their entitlement my whole life. Their attempts at damage control were futile. They were canceled by the court of public opinion. I didn't take the post down. I didn't answer the calls. I went silent. That silence was the loudest, most definitive answer I could give. I had exposed their lies, and now I was leaving them to deal with the fallout. That silent retreat was the true end of the charade. I had successfully replaced their power of emotional blackmail with my power of documentation and public exposure. I had walked away from the toxic narrative they had imposed on me my entire life. I was finally defined by my actions, my career, and my courage, not by their acceptance or rejection. I walked with Olivia in the park, discussing my next major investigative piece. The true balance was restored. I lost a toxic family but gained an honest life. The emptiness still lingered sometimes, a dull ache where unconditional love should have been. But that ache was manageable. It was the mark of a survivor. The Corvette Stingray was gone, but the principle it represented, self-reliance and hard-won dignity, was permanently safe with me. The cruel truth was revealed, and my vindication was complete. A few months passed. The media frenzy died down, but the silence between us was heavier than any public outcry. I was healing, building a life free of their toxic influence. The question wasn't if they'd reach out, but how. They struck predictably, through an unsolicited, lavish gift. A massive, expensive bouquet arrived at my door with a handwritten card. The card was from Helen. It spoke of misunderstandings and wishing to reconnect before it's too late. It didn't mention the theft, the fraud, or the public shaming, just a calculated, passive-aggressive attempt at recovery. I knew the flowers were meant not for me, but for their own need to feel like they had tried. I promptly tossed the card and the entire bouquet into the communal dumpster. But they didn't stop there. A week later, John engineered a chance encounter at my favorite coffee shop. He approached my table wearing a strained smile. He launched into a polished speech about how family is forever and how the legal matter was just a minor hiccup. He played the desperate, regretful father role perfectly, detailing the damage to his business and Helen's social isolation as if they were my responsibility. I didn't interrupt his performance. I simply sipped my coffee. When he finished, I looked him in the eye and delivered a single, unyielding line. Our relationship is irreparable, John. The damage wasn't minor, it was structural. I watched the calculated mask shatter, replaced by genuine shock. He realized my boundaries were now enforced by steel, not guilt. He finally understood that the true damage wasn't the car. It was the total breakdown of trust that could never be rebuilt with flowers or staged encounters. I gathered my things and walked past him without another word, leaving him sitting alone, staring at the remnants of his failed manipulation. My resolve was absolute. 6 months passed, and the silence had become comfortable. My life was thriving, both professionally and personally. I was learning that peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the ability to choose not to engage. My journalism career was finally reaching the potential I'd always fought for, unburdened by family expectation or financial sabotage. The clarity I gained from the confrontation was like a superpower. Then, the news broke, but it wasn't about me. It was about John's failed business dealings. His questionable practices, long hidden beneath the family man facade, finally caught up with him. Apparently, the financial turmoil from my lawsuit, coupled with his desperate attempts to recover his lost social standing and income, had forced him to make even riskier, more unethical moves to stay afloat. He had leveraged assets carelessly and signed contracts without due diligence, a direct consequence of his arrogance. It was a classic case of a narcissist doubling down on their self-destruction, believing his charm and connections could bail him out of anything, just like they always had. This time, the damage was too large, too public, and too legally entrenched. The consequence was inevitable, and it was far more severe than the minor reputational dents I had inflicted. The desperation was palpable. I got a handwritten letter, not on fancy stationery, but on cheap notebook paper from Helen. Her tone had shifted dramatically from passive aggression to raw, unadulterated fear. The shift was almost comical, a performance designed purely to elicit pity. She admitted John faced significant civil penalties and possibly ruin, mentioning the loss of their primary home and John's possible disbarment. But the appeal wasn't genuine remorse. It was a desperate plea to save the family name and shield Emily from financial consequences, shamelessly referencing shared blood and filial duty, as if those terms still held any meaning between us. The request was for a bridge loan of $50,000 to cover legal retainers. The sheer audacity, months after their theft and public shaming, was breathtaking. They truly believed I was still the ATM, the loyal soldier who would rush in to clean up their mess out of ingrained guilt. I showed the letter to Olivia. I asked Olivia what she thought my journalistic self would do, framing it as an ethical dilemma of compassion versus consequence. Olivia smiled, a knowing, weary smile. Your journalistic self demands the truth, and the truth is, you are not responsible for cleaning up the mess they created. That boundary you set, it's time to defend it. Giving them money now is just funding the continuation of their deceit and delaying the necessary lesson they must learn. Her advice affirmed the cold resolve I already felt. I realized that responding, even to refuse, would be acknowledging their right to my attention and energy. I would be reopening the door I had fought so hard to slam shut. I carefully, methodically, shredded the letter. I didn't send a text. I didn't send an email. I gave them nothing. No emotional response, no financial lifeline, just the echoing silence of their own consequences. And the most surprising thing? The guilt, the old familiar trigger they had always relied on, was gone. I felt a profound sadness for the loss of what could have been, the idealized family unit that never existed, but I felt absolutely no obligation to save what was a sinking ship steered by two selfish captains. I was truly free. I drove myself through the city. The noise of their crisis was muffled, distant. I understood that this new crisis wasn't my burden, it was the final, inevitable climax of their own toxic story, a natural consequence of the character flaws they refused to address. I had chosen peace over their manufactured panic. A few weeks after the $50,000 loan was denied, the true consequence of their actions began to fall squarely on Emily. The refusal of the loan hit them harder than the lawsuit itself, because it was the final, definitive withdrawal of my financial lifeline. For Emily, the spoiled darling who had never faced a genuine obstacle, the world suddenly stopped catering to her needs. Her apartment was messy, her credit cards were declined, and the familiar safety net of daddy's money or mommy's manipulation had vanished. She had lived her entire life in a golden cage, where problems were solved by wealth. Now, neither resource was functioning, and she was forced to confront reality. Her carefully constructed ballet career began to crumble. The public scorn, triggered by my post and amplified by her family's subsequent financial failure, had made her too controversial for major sponsors and companies. She failed an audition. The first-time failure had truly cost her something more than a minor ego bruise. The rejection was absolute. She tried to call her mother, but Helen, busy dealing with John's legal issues, simply texted back, "Figure it out, Emily. We're dealing with bigger problems now." A few days later, I saw her, not at a fancy restaurant near the theater, but at a cheap diner near my apartment, looking utterly defeated. She was alone. Her friends, the ones who happily benefited from her parents' endless wealth and connections, had ghosted her completely, unwilling to associate with a person whose social currency had been revoked. I watched her from a distance, recognizing the pain of isolation that I had felt my whole life. It wasn't the theft that defined this moment, it was the solitude. I saw the flicker of realization in her eyes. She finally realized that the approval she sought from her parents, and the loyalty she expected from her friends, was always conditional, based solely on her status and their money. Her parents, in their own crisis, had completely abandoned her. Proving her value to them was only as high as her ability to uphold their image. Her tears now were different. They weren't manipulative or entitled. They were the tears of a child whose illusion of safety had been violently shattered. The harsh realization was that her parents' love was just another transaction, and when the bank account closed, so did the emotional support. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. Her punishment wasn't handed down by me. It was the natural, delayed consequence of her lifetime of entitlement. I simply walked out of the diner, leaving her alone with her harsh, well-deserved realization. A year passed. My career didn't just survive the turmoil, it flourished. Free from their constant need for approval, my writing became sharper, my focus clearer. I was recently promoted to senior editor, a professional milestone I knew I earned purely through merit. The $85,000 wasn't just repaid, it was invested. I bought a small apartment, fully mine, with no history of emotional debt attached. I had replaced their toxicity with tangible, earned stability. My SUV, my apartment, my job, these were the monuments to my self-worth. My relationship with Olivia evolved from lawyer-client to genuine, supportive friendship. She taught me that sometimes the most profound act of self-care is enforcing a zero-tolerance boundary against chronic manipulators. Then came the annual test, my birthday. A single, short text message arrived from Helen, "Thinking of you on your special day. Call us when you're ready to forgive." That was the old trigger, the subtle demand disguised as a caring message, the implicit suggestion that I was the one withholding something necessary for reconciliation. It used to send me into a spiral of guilt and obligation, but not anymore. The trigger had been deactivated. The old Amber would have obsessed over the perfect diplomatic non-response. The new Amber saw it as the final boundary test. I typed back a final message not out of anger, but out of clarity and self-respect. I am ready, Helen, but forgiveness is only possible after true accountability, genuine remorse, and restitution for years of emotional damage. Until then, the boundary remains: do not contact me again. I didn't wait for a reply, which I knew would only be another denial or demand. Then, I hit the block button. That small digital action was the most powerful moment of my entire journey. It was the final, irreversible severance from their toxic history, a definitive declaration that my self-worth is non-negotiable. The greatest revenge wasn't seeing them fail, it was seeing myself win my peace, win my value, and win the right to define my own life. I was no longer the victim of a family revenge story, I was the author of my own success. I stood up for myself, and in doing so, I finally realized the immense, quiet power of simply choosing not to participate in my own destruction. My life had truly begun. My silence was a vacuum. Without me to blame, the toxic energy my family used to direct outwards had to find a new target. It turned inward, setting their once perfect house on fire from the inside. John's business collapsed under the weight of his own misdeeds. The civil penalties forced them to sell the house, not the grand one, but the smaller, comfortable one they moved to after the initial fallout. They were financially crushed and forced into a cheap, cramped rental apartment, a symbol of their diminished status. The core pathology remained: denial of responsibility. John blamed Helen for not raising a proper daughter who understood family loyalty, and for having too many expensive social engagements. Helen blamed John for his reckless business decisions and for allowing Amber to win the lawsuit. Their arguments were relentless, loud, and punctuated by the sharp sting of poverty, a life they had never known. John would often snarl, "It's all her fault, Helen. Amber's. She did this to us." They couldn't face the truth. Their own entitlement and favoritism had created the weaponry that brought them down. It was infinitely easier to make me the eternal scapegoat than to look in the mirror and acknowledge their fundamental flaws. Then, Emily, stripped of her career opportunities and abandoned by her superficial friends, had nowhere to go but back home. She expected comfort, the old adulation, the soft landing she was always promised. Instead, she found a new role waiting for her: the target. Helen, exhausted by John's relentless blame and suddenly facing a bleak, uncertain future, turned on Emily with chilling efficiency. If you hadn't needed that ridiculously expensive wellness retreat, John wouldn't have been desperate for money, and none of this would have happened. You were always the high-maintenance one. The words were a brutal, ironic echo of the very sentiment they used to deny me basic support. Emily, the golden child, crumpled under the weight of this raw betrayal. She had never been criticized by her mother, only adored. The irony was suffocating. The real victim of the family's toxicity, me, was free, flourishing in my self-made life. The favorite child, Emily, was now trapped in a crumbling structure, being devoured by the very parents who had created her entitlement and dependency. John, feeling his power diminish with every financial failure, didn't defend Emily. He joined in, projecting his professional failure onto her artistic pursuits. "You think you're so special. You're a failed dancer who drove us to ruin with your pointless indulgences." The act was over. Their perfect family facade didn't just crack. It had disintegrated into a pile of mutual accusations and venomous bitterness. They were consuming each other, and the only common ground left was the unwavering, desperate belief that I was the genesis of all their misfortune. Their narrative remained intact. Amber was the villain, the one who stole their happiness, even as they tore each other apart over a cramped dining table. I heard about this implosion months later through an old neighbor who still kept track of them, a detached source of information that felt appropriate for my distance. It was a cold confirmation of my decision. The toxic dynamic required a victim to function, an outlet for their blame and resentment. Since I refused the role, they forced one of their own to play it. My revenge wasn't active, it was the inevitable, natural consequence of their refusal to change. I walked through the park that day, feeling an immense, quiet serenity. They were stuck in the same destructive loop, while I had broken free. I was truly untouchable. The chaos they were living in was their choice, not my burden. I met Olivia for coffee, sharing the grim update from the old neighbor regarding John's business collapse and Emily's new status as the family's scapegoat. The topic of our conversation was not guilt or pity, but validation. Olivia raised her mug. You fought a legal battle, yes, but more importantly, you fought an emotional one. You proved that walking away is winning when the game is rigged against you. You saved yourself. Her words were the final, professional confirmation I needed, sealing the door shut on any lingering self-doubt. The real surprise came from the supportive voices online. My original post exposing the manipulation continued to circulate, becoming a rallying cry for others trapped in toxic family dynamics, narcissistic parents, golden children, and long-suffering scapegoats. I spent an entire evening reading the comments. People shared their own stories of stolen inheritances, emotional abuse, and the difficult process of enforcing boundaries. They weren't just followers, they were fellow survivors recognizing their own fight in mine. One comment stuck with me, a profound distillation of the entire saga. Amber, thank you for showing us that accountability is the only currency with people like this. You bought your freedom with the truth. That single line encapsulated the whole truth. It brought a wave of deep vindication. I had worried that fighting them publicly would make me as vindictive as they were. But the online community showed me that my actions weren't fueled by spite or revenge, but by a desperate foundational need for self-preservation and justice. The distinction was everything. I stood before my apartment window, looking out at the city I had conquered. My story, originally a private horror, became a tool, a mission, to tell others that the moment you choose yourself over a toxic loyalty, that's when your healing truly begins. The family revenge story ends not with the downfall of the villains, but with the ascension of the survivor. That ascension is my peace. Two years later, my apartment was quiet, filled with sunlight, and most importantly, safe. The safety didn't come from external protection, it came from the ironclad boundaries I had erected around my life. The past was a closed book, archived and labeled lessons learned. The lingering shadows of guilt and obligation had finally dissipated, replaced by a profound, earned sense of inner peace. I no longer checked my phone nervously or anticipated the next manipulative phone call. The freedom was palpable, a constant, low-level hum of self-determination. The $85,000 they stole ultimately served as the catalyst for my liberation. It forced the crisis that I desperately needed to end the cycle of manipulation and obligation. Their greed became my freedom. The trauma they inflicted was the fuel I used to build an entirely new structure, one based on merit, accountability, and integrity, not toxic loyalty or emotional blackmail. I realized that the value of the money was secondary, the true value was in the lesson it delivered, both to them and to me. The repayment was merely a legal formality, the emotional and psychological separation was the genuine reward. My career soared. I published a series of investigative pieces on ethics, accountability, and the subtle ways power is abused within familial and corporate structures, subtly drawing from my own experience without ever naming names. I became the voice of integrity I always wanted to be, respected by my peers and promoted to a position of true authority. My success was a quiet, potent affirmation of my competence, something my family always tried to minimize with passive-aggressive comments about my unstable career choice. I invested wisely, building a solid financial foundation that could never be threatened by a family member's desperation or deceit. My SUV, my apartment, my secure future, these were the tangible evidence of my self-sufficiency, purchased not with inherited wealth, but with hard, honest work. The financial independence alone was a fortress. Crucially, I built new relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care, not transactions or obligation. Olivia was not just my legal advisor, but my dear confidante and a mentor in life philosophy. My friends were cheerleaders who celebrated my triumphs without envy, not competitors vying for limited parental approval. For the first time, I understood the difference between being loved and being needed for someone else's emotional supply. The love I experienced now was unconditional and reciprocal. I learned to recognize the subtle warning signs of narcissism and manipulation, making my new circle of trust impenetrable to toxicity. This new social structure was the heart of my healing. I occasionally received updates on my old family through reliable, third-party sources, a distant echo I permitted myself to monitor, purely out of academic curiosity, much like studying a defunct case file. They were still in the small, cramped rental, still blaming Amber for their every woe, and still demanding Emily get a proper job to save them from poverty. The dynamic never changed, only the targets shifted. John's legal troubles compounded, Helen's social isolation solidified, and Emily, now the default scapegoat, was unable to escape because she lacked the emotional and financial tools to establish boundaries. They were trapped in a loop of stagnation and denial, unable to evolve because they were incapable of accountability. John and Helen continued to blame each other, while Emily remained the convenient scapegoat for their present misery, her early life of privilege now a cruel, unreachable memory. The greatest revenge wasn't the lawsuit, the public exposure, or their financial ruin. Those were merely consequences. The true, final revenge was my utter indifference to their fate. They could not touch my peace, my career, or my self-worth. Their entire existence was now irrelevant to mine. A chapter 1 had definitively closed. They were frozen in time, consumed by their own pathology, while I was moving forward, rapidly evolving beyond their reach. This indifference was the zenith of my recovery. I often thought of the viewer watching this story. If you've been the scapegoat, the victim of family narcissism, the truth is simple: you don't need their apology. You don't need their permission. You just need your own exit strategy. You have to choose yourself, break the toxic cycle, and realize that your value is inherent, not conditional on their approval or emotional needs. My victory wasn't defined by their loss, but by my gains, self-sovereignty. I had reclaimed my narrative, my identity, and my doses. I was the architect of my new world, and that world was built on solid ground. The family revenge story was over. My journey had just begun. I had won the only battle that ever truly mattered, the battle for my own self. Years passed. The constant vigilance I once felt, the subtle fear of their next move, faded entirely into a quiet, reliable tranquility. My life was no longer defined by what they stole, but by what I built: a thriving career, a peaceful home, and relationships based on genuine connection. I stopped checking the news for their names. They had become ghosts of a distant past, their drama irrelevant to my present. I fully internalized that the power they held over me was an illusion I had mistakenly validated for years. Then, an unexpected email arrived from a distant relative, someone entirely outside the conflict and unaware of the full scope of the family trauma. It was brief, respectful, and delivered the final, necessary information for true closure. John and Helen had separated. They were formally divorcing, dividing what little wealth they had left after John's legal settlements. I showed the email to Olivia. We didn't exchange shock or glee. We exchanged a look of inevitable understanding. Their relationship was never a partnership in love or mutual respect. It was always a transactional alliance, a co-conspiracy built on control and mutual enablement. The core of their bond was the pursuit of wealth and the maintenance of a perfect social facade, fueled by their shared sense of entitlement. Once the money, their primary fuel, ran out, and the scapegoat me was gone, the illusion had nothing left to sustain it. The structure simply imploded. The stress of poverty, the loss of social standing, and the inability to accept personal accountability finally ate away at the foundation of their toxic union. The very mechanism they used to hurt me, their systemic denial of reality, ultimately destroyed them. It was a perfect, self-inflicted justice. The relative also mentioned Emily. She was still struggling financially, working low-paying jobs that barely covered her rent, but crucially, she was independent. She was forced to learn responsibility, a painful but necessary lesson her parents had intentionally prevented her from knowing by solving every problem for her. There was no comfortable safety net, no phone call to mommy for a bridge loan. She was navigating the real world, belatedly. I felt a momentary flicker of pity, not for them, but for the years they wasted chasing a false, fragile image of perfection. That pity was quickly extinguished by the realization that their fate was entirely their own making, a consequence of choices they rigidly refused to reconsider. My life was governed by a new, simple mantra: my life, my rules. I realized that the fight had never been about the money, it was about the right to self-definition. The settlement money was just the receipt for my liberation. The most profound part of this victory was realizing that I didn't need their failure to feel whole. My self-worth was intrinsic. The story was no longer about revenge. It was about reclamation. I had reclaimed my name, my fortune, and my future. The end of their marriage was the final act of a tragic play I had already walked out of, and the sound of that final curtain falling was the sweetest silence I had ever heard. I looked out at the city at sunset, feeling a deep, abiding tranquility. They had chosen to remain locked in their cycle of blame and decay, while I had chosen growth and peace. My life was entirely new, entirely mine. This was the true end of the family revenge story. The survivor doesn't just survive, she thrives, completely and utterly beyond the reach of her past. My life was tranquil, but my story wasn't just for me anymore. I realized the true power of my narrative lay in its ability to empower others. The volume of supportive messages I received online, the shared hard-time, the common experiences of gaslighting and manipulation showed me that my experience, once a source of deep shame, was actually a universal blueprint for survival. It was time to turn the trauma into a tool. I started writing. Not another investigative report, which was my safe zone, but a book, a practical guide for family scapegoats outlining the steps for radical self-rescue and establishing no-contact boundaries. The working title was The Scapegoat's Guide to Self-Sovereignty: How to Divorce Your Toxic Family and Win Your Peace. I detailed the process from recognizing the gaslighting to setting the legal and financial foundation for a clean break. Every chapter was a lesson I had learned through tears, litigation, and emotional exhaustion. Writing it was the final, deepest layer of my own healing process, turning memory into wisdom. The pitch to my publisher was an immediate success. The editor saw the universal need for this message instantly. "It's not just a memoir, Amber," she said. "It's a manifesto. It's the permission slip millions of people are waiting for to choose themselves." That moment was a profound validation that my struggle had meaning far beyond my personal revenge. My victory wasn't just my own, it belonged to every person who had ever been told they were too sensitive or too emotional for seeing the truth. Ironically, just as the book deal was finalized and the manuscript was polished, I received an attempted contact. Not from Helen or John, whose numbers and emails remained permanently blocked, but a message forwarded from Emily on a burner email address, short and loaded with veiled meaning, asking if I was still mad. I looked at the screen for a long time. The message wasn't an apology or an offer of accountability. It was an attempt to shift the focus onto my anger, suggesting my continued non-contact was an emotional failure on my part. The old Amber would have felt obligated to write a detailed, defensive email explaining her choices. The new Amber felt nothing but a cool, unshakable indifference. I simply closed the laptop. I wasn't mad. Anger requires engagement. I was disconnected. Emily hadn't understood the fundamental shift that had occurred. My peace wasn't reliant on her forgiveness. and my success wasn't dependent on their approval. I had achieved emotional and psychological severing, a far more permanent state than mere anger. To be angry is to still care. To be indifferent is to be free. Months later, my book launched to critical and popular acclaim. Seeing the faces of people whose lives I touched at the first book, signing strangers who finally felt seen, understood, and validated was the only validation that mattered. These were people who understood the silent language of the scapegoat, the subtle pain of conditional love. This community was my new family, built on shared truth and respect, not blood or obligation. The story of family revenge ends here, not with a tragic ending for the villains, but with a triumphant beginning for the hero. The greatest act of revenge is building a life so beautiful and so peaceful that the toxicity of the past cannot reach you, and then using your survival to light the way for others still trapped in the darkness. My journey was the proof you can reclaim your narrative, you can choose yourself. You can win your peace. And when you do, that peace is the ultimate, non-negotiable self-sovereignty. So, what is the ultimate conclusion of a family revenge story? It's not about watching them suffer. That was just a side effect, a natural consequence of their character, the logical endpoint of years of emotional manipulation and financial entitlement. They destroyed themselves because they lacked the capacity for accountability, not because of anything I did after I left. The ending belongs to me, not them. Revenge in its purest form isn't an action, it's a state of being. It's refusing to let their bitterness define your future. It is choosing healing over hate every single day, choosing progress over pity, and choosing peace over pointless conflict. My life now is built on simplicity and transparency. I don't have to perform or manipulate. I can enjoy a cup of coffee on a quiet Sunday morning without an underlying agenda, without rehearsing a defense, and without anticipating a crisis. That simple joy is the ultimate luxury, a luxury that John and Helen, trapped in their self-made poverty and isolation, will never truly know. They chose the gilded cage, I chose the open sky. To anyone watching who feels like the scapegoat, your greatest power lies in your ability to walk away. They lose their control the moment you realize you don't need their version of love to survive. That moment of realization is your real lawsuit, your real victory. Don't waste energy on trying to change their narrative. Focus on building your own. I am grateful for the entire journey. It was horrific, yes, but it forced me to forge my own steel. I am stronger, more authentic, and fundamentally free because I had the courage to sever the ties. The only thing you can truly control in life is your response and your boundaries. Use your story not as a cage, but as a blueprint for a better life. Choose to be the architect, not the victim. The story is over, but my life is not. This is the moment where the family revenge story fades and the self-sovereignty story begins. My story is proof that you can win against the most intimate form of betrayal, the betrayal of family. Now, it's time to talk about your turning point. If the emotional toll of my experience resonates with you, know this: you are not alone, and your feelings are valid. You deserve peace, and that peace begins with action. Here are the 5 truths I learned that set me free and can set you free too. First, accountability is not negotiable. Never settle for a superficial apology that lacks genuine change or restitution. If they won't own their actions, you cannot engage. Second, your boundaries must be ironclad. They are not walls to keep others out. They are the foundation for keeping your self-worth in. Communicate your limits clearly and enforce them relentlessly. Third, self-sufficiency is your greatest weapon. Financial and emotional independence allows you to walk away without looking back. Build your own fortress of stability. Fourth, indifference is the final revenge. Emotional distance, not anger, is the definitive proof that they have lost control over you. You can't be hurt by what you don't care about. Fifth, build your own chosen family. Seek relationships based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine care, not obligation or blood ties. These new connections are the infrastructure of your healing. If you are ready to stop being the victim and start building your sovereign life, hit the like button to acknowledge your commitment to yourself right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this truth, someone still trapped in the family dynamic. And tell me in the comments below, what boundary are you setting today? Your story matters. Your freedom is waiting. Choose yourself.